Forget everything you think you know about the prudish Middle Ages. The truth is far more complex, passionate, and yes, sometimes downright bizarre. Today, we're exploring 5 medieval customs around love and intimacy that not only shaped European culture for centuries, but continue to influence our modern understanding of romance. Number 1. The art of courtly love, when romance was a performance. Our first stop takes us to the opulent courts of 12th century France, where love itself became an art form. This wasn't just romance. This was courtly love, and it was unlike anything we practice today. Picture this. You're a knight, and you've fallen for a noble lady. But here's the catch. She's likely married, of higher social status, and completely unattainable. So what do? You embark on what could be a years-long campaign of elaborate romantic gestures. We're talking about composing epic poems that would be performed in front of entire courts. Knights would commission artists to create illuminated manuscripts filled with declarations of love. They'd wear their beloved's colors into battle, dedicate tournaments to them, and sometimes even go on pilgrimages in their honor. The fascinating part? Physical consummation was often considered the end of courtly love, not the goal. The tension, the longing, the impossible nature of the relationship. That was where the magic lived. One famous example is the troubadour Joffre Rudel, who fell in love with the Countess of Tripoli without ever meeting her, simply based on stories he'd heard. He eventually sailed to the Holy Land just to see her, allegedly dying in her arms upon arrival. Whether true or legend, it perfectly captures the medieval ideal of love as transcendent suffering. This tradition gave us the concept of romantic love as we know it, the idea that love should be passionate, all-consuming, and yes, a little torturous. It influenced everything from Shakespeare's sonnets to modern dating apps, where we still perform versions of these elaborate courtship rituals. Number 2. The mystery of medieval chastity, control, power, and symbolism. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the belt in the bedroom. Medieval chastity devices have become the stuff of legend, but the reality is far more nuanced than most people realize. First, let's bust a major myth. The idea that jealous husbands routinely lock their wives in metal contraptions before leaving for the Crusades? Largely fantasy. Most supposed medieval chastity belts in museums actually date from the 16th century or later, and many were likely created as curiosities rather than functional devices. But here's where it gets interesting. The concept of chastity as a form of power and control was very real in medieval society. For women, virginity and chastity weren't just personal choices. They were economic and political commodities. A woman's sexual purity could determine her family's social standing, her marriage prospects, and even international alliances. Medieval literature is filled with stories of elaborate tests and proofs of chastity. The Arthurian legends include magical chastity tests, cloaks that would only fit pure women, or drinking horns that would spill if touched by unfaithful wives. These weren't real practices, but they reflected very real anxieties about fidelity and control. What's particularly fascinating is how these concepts of restraint and denial became eroticized in medieval culture. The more forbidden something was, the more desirable it became. This tension between restriction and desire permeated medieval art, literature, and even religious practices. The psychological impact was profound. By making intimacy rare, difficult, and surrounded by ritual, medieval society inadvertently intensified its power and meaning. It's a dynamic we still see today in everything from religious practices to modern relationship advice. Number 3. When privacy didn't exist. The public nature of medieval intimacy. Imagine this scenario. It's your wedding night, and instead of romantic privacy, you've got your parents, siblings, friends, and half the village watching you get into bed. Welcome to medieval marriage customs, where intimate moments were often surprisingly public affairs. The bedding ceremony was a real and widespread practice across medieval Europe. After the wedding feast, the bride and groom would be ceremonially escorted to their marriage bed by the entire wedding party. Guests would throw nuts, rice, and flowers, symbols of fertility, while singing rowdy songs and making jokes that would make a modern comedian blush. But this wasn't just entertainment. It served serious legal and social purposes. In an era without official marriage certificates, Witnesses to the bedding ceremony provided legal proof that the marriage had been consummated. This was crucial for inheritance rights, property transfers, and political alliances. The practice varied by region and social class. In some areas, guests would actually remain in the bedchamber until the couple was properly tucked in. In others, they'd wait outside for evidence that the marriage had been consummated. Yes, that's as awkward as it sounds. Royal weddings took this to extremes. When Princess Margaret of England married King Alexander III of Scotland in 1251, the bedding ceremony was witnessed by dozens of nobles from both kingdoms. It was considered a matter of international importance. This public approach to intimacy reflects a fundamentally different understanding of privacy than we have today. In medieval society, individual desires were often secondary to family, community, and political needs. Your intimate life wasn't really yours. It belonged to your family, your community, and sometimes your entire kingdom. Yet paradoxically, this public oversight sometimes created its own form of protection. The community involvement meant that abuse or mistreatment was harder to hide, and new spouses had built-in support systems. Number 4. Medieval magic and the science of seduction. Medieval people believed passionately in the power of aphrodisiacs, love potions, and magical charms to enhance desire and ensure fidelity. But before you roll your eyes at primitive superstition, consider this. Many of these practices were actually based on sophisticated understanding of psychology, chemistry, and what we'd now call aromatherapy. Medieval texts are filled with elaborate recipes for love potions. The 13th century medical text, Trotula, included detailed instructions for enhancing desire using herbs like damiana, ginseng, and saffron, ingredients that modern science has actually validated as having mild aphrodisiac properties. But it wasn't just about herbs. Medieval lovers used an astonishing array of sensory experiences to create romantic atmosphere. They understood that desire begins in the mind, not the body. Expensive spices weren't just for food. They were burned as incense during intimate encounters. Rose water wasn't just perfume. It was believed to open the heart to love. Some practices were genuinely bizarre. Medieval medical texts suggested that consuming the heart of a hoopoe bird would make you irresistible to the opposite sex. Wearing amulets made from specific stones supposedly enhanced performance. There were even elaborate rituals involving planetary alignments and astrological timing. But here's the fascinating part. Many of these practices worked, not because of magic, but because of psychology. If you spend an entire evening preparing a romantic environment with carefully chosen scents, foods, and atmosphere, you're probably going to have a better experience. The ritual itself creates anticipation and mindfulness. Medieval people also understood the power of suggestion and expectation. If both partners believed a particular herb or ritual would enhance their experience, it often did, what we now recognize as a placebo effect, but no less real for being psychological. The most sophisticated practitioners were often women. Medieval texts by female authors like Hildegard of Bingen included detailed advice on herbs and practices for enhancing marital harmony. These women were essentially early sexologists, using the tools available to them to help couples create better relationships. Number 5. Sacred and profane. The complex dance of religious desire. Perhaps nowhere was medieval complexity around. Intimacy more apparent than in the relationship between religious devotion and earthly desire. The medieval mind didn't separate sacred and profane the way we do today. Instead, they existed in constant, creative tension. Medieval Christianity officially promoted celibacy and viewed physical desire with suspicion. Yet medieval culture produced some of the most sensual religious art and literature in Western history. Think about it. Medieval churches were filled with erotic imagery, from fertility symbols carved into stone to religious texts that used explicitly sexual metaphors to describe divine love. The most famous example is this Song of Songs from the Bible, which medieval theologians interpreted as an allegory for the soul's relationship with God, but which reads like passionate love poetry. Medieval mystics like Marguerite Porete wrote about spiritual ecstasy in language that was frankly erotic. This created a fascinating dynamic where forbidden desires became more intense through restriction. Medieval literature is filled with stories of monks and nuns struggling with desire, of religious figures having passionate affairs, of the constant tension between flesh and spirit. But rather than seeing this as hypocrisy, medieval people often viewed it as part of the human condition. The struggle between desire and restraint wasn't a bug in the system, it was a feature. It was through this struggle that people grew spiritually and emotionally.